Is this an ethical adjustment? What about this? How about this? The dawn of Instagram has ushered in a new type of photographer, and with that, a new dilemma for photo ethics. Now, photo ethics are a massive topic ranging from the shooting process to the post-processing field, but today I want to hone in on landscape post-processing because this is something I've seen a lot of foul play in on Instagram lately, so I want to attempt to get a little philosophical and lay out some ground rules on what is reasonable for all of us. Instagram and the modern camera industry have in many ways redefined photo ethics and how we think of them as a culture. Now, before the rise of affordable, high-quality digital cameras, there was a very clear distinction between professional and amateur photographer. Professional photographers had the best cameras, they caught the best moments, and they held staff positions at major publications that held to a very firm set of photojournalism guidelines. Now, the modern photographer can buy a camera for a relatively cheap price, watch some tutorials on YouTube, and immediately be shooting some very high-caliber photos, near professional level, without having any understanding or accountability for what are modern photo ethics. They might not even know these exist. Today's young self-starting photographers have grown up on Instagram and ushered in a new style of photography that I like to call hyperrealism. Kind of like HyperRealism, get it? That is a combination between photojournalism and fantasy photography. This style, popularized by travel photographers, involves making collages or composite images in Photoshop that appear completely undoctored, adding in sunsets or fake Milky Ways from completely different locations, fake smoke, fog, sun flares, or even fake birds or hot air balloons. With certain photographers now making this the norm, oversaturating our sunsets to stand out in the feed suddenly seem a lot less offensive, and as a result, I think there has been a general decline in honest photography practices in the landscape realm, and we all just want to stand out. While I'm all for artistic progression and using photography as a tool to create surrealist art, I do take issue with the deceptive use of it. Now, when you have these artists marketing themselves as simple, classic photographers who are then using Photoshop to create completely unrealistic photos that are then branded as reality, this is causing a bunch of issues. So just to go over a couple of the big ones. First, we're creating unrealistic expectations for beginner photographers. No matter how many times they try, they're not going to be able to capture that Milky Way over Manhattan skyline because it's completely impossible. Yet people that don't know better are going to be very discouraged from photography. Second, it's telling a very dishonest story about the location. Now, we've come to expect this from advertisements, yet when you have these influencers who brand themselves as being very real and authentic to their audience, this is an unexpected location for this sort of deceptiveness. And third, they're doing a disservice to photography as an art. To me, landscape photography has always been about pushing our cameras to create the most beautiful rendition of reality as possible. Now, when you have these people that come in and Photoshop a sunset from some completely different location onto one shot, you're doing a disservice to all of the honest photographers who've gone back to that same spot 7 times over waiting for that perfect sunset, and you're just delegitimizing the work of all of these honest photographers. Digging into that last point, I want to talk about photography as an art form. Now, it might sound a little bit old guard, but I want to remind you that I'm actually a big fan of composites. By all means, composite away, I think they're awesome. I just really want people to be disclosing of it when they do so. So on Instagram, just leave it in the caption saying, hey, this is 2 separate images. I made this supermoon 20 times bigger. Just admit to these things and we'll all be a lot happier. Now, I understand why photographers wouldn't want to disclose of this. Their work seems a lot more impressive when you think it's just one undoctored image, and when they admit to it, it now enters into the world of visual art where their work seems a lot less compelling. Yet, for the sake of appreciation for honest photography, I think this is a really important distinction we have to make. Now, sure, there is the argument to be made that aggressive photoshopping is taking full advantage of the creative medium, but I want to remind you that our culture has come to really appreciate the hard work that people put into their creative process. There's a reason why we value an original painting and the painstaking effort that was put into that by the artist as opposed to a machine-produced print. When an artist photoshops 3 different images together and sells it as a single one, it's like hawking a machine-produced print and telling people it's an original painting. It's doing a disservice to people that use the camera as their only medium. Photoshop is another medium, and it's really important we make this distinction. Let's talk about this ambiguity here. Obviously, it's easy for me to encourage everyone to be honest and disclose if they feel they've pushed into this new form of creative medium, but where do we draw these lines and how big is this gray area? Now, a very basic, simple rule of thumb for us is Did this moment exist at a single point in time? And if the answer is yes, then you're good. Now, unfortunately, it's not that simple. At the base level, the most honest photo to shoot would be one that is completely unedited. However, I think this is totally absurd. Modern digital cameras take huge image sizes because they're storing all this information and they're deliberately softening the colors and the tones to allow us to bring them out in post-processing. Obviously, editing is expected of us, yet what is the right amount of editing and how much editing is too much? Can we oversaturate our skies to make them appear better than they did in real life? Now, this is a really tough thing, and a lot of photographers are all about this. I think the Instagram algorithm favors oversaturated landscape photos, so it's very tempting to do this. My rule of thumb is try to edit according to what it looked like in real life. So this photo I shot at the Washington Monument, I will admit I edited too far. Realistically, the sunrise was really cloudy and just a dull purple, caused more from light pollution than beautiful sunrise colors, and I pushed this too far in Lightroom. But some photographers might think this is perfectly okay. This is a really ambiguous one, and I encourage you to draw your own standards for how far you think is too far. I personally now try to achieve what I saw with my eyes. What about HDRs, or high dynamic range images, where you're shooting 3, 4, even 5 exposures and stitching them all together in Photoshop to create a single frame? On one hand, this is composite work, but also how do we reconcile this improving technology and AI that automatically creates these HDRs? So smartphones like the iPhone automatically take HDR photos and videos now, so it's being made without any post-processing whatsoever thanks to the AI. Is that okay? Is that still honest? Sticking with our if this moment existed rule of thumb, then I'd say HDRs are perfectly okay because you're just capturing a single moment using a couple different frames shot over the course of a couple seconds. However, when you start to push the amount of time in between each frame, it gets a little bit dicey. For example, this HDR I shot over the Manhattan skyline is 4 different images. It's one for sunset, one for the skyline at night, so we have the buildings lit up, and 2 different ones for the fireworks. So they were shot over the course of an hour and a half. And this is something that I think is important to disclose. This is no longer a single moment. This is some Photoshop wizardry. This leads us to our most contentious question, and that is, if there's something in the back of the frame that we find distracting, can we Photoshop them out? So maybe there's a person or a couple people sitting down in front of your landscape you don't want in the shot. Maybe there's a rogue fence that you think is kind of annoying. Can you remove these things? Some people would say absolutely not. Any sort of Photoshopping where you're removing is altering reality and completely not fair game. Others would say as long as you're not altering the general makeup of the photo. So take this shot from Acadia National Park. If I were to add a second lighthouse to the shot, that is a subject altering Photoshop. That's obviously too far. Yet if I want to remove a leaf that's in the water, is that okay? And you have to draw that line yourself. Some people might say we should stick to the only one image rule, so no compositing and then it's okay. But the fact of the matter is Photoshop is so powerful that we can make any sort of adjustments we want just using a single image. So you do have to draw your line as far as what you feel is reasonable to do. For a personal example, here is a photo I shot of Acadia National Park during sunrise. This is actually an HDR, but that's not the problem. And this is the edited version. This was the original version. So as you can see, I Photoshopped out a lot of people. And at the time, I didn't think much of it, but now I honestly would not have done this. I think this is taking it a little bit too far, especially because this is such a popular sunrise spot where it's impossible to get an unobstructed view without people in front of your frame. It's not gonna happen. So I think this presents an unrealistic expectation of what this sunrise spot can be, and therefore I pushed it too far. In summary, there is an incredibly large gray area between what is okay and what's not okay, and it is up to you as the photographer to determine your own expectations for yourself and where you have to draw the line. The pursuit of most landscape photographers is to capture the world in the most idyllic sense, oftentimes using tools to capture what the naked eye can't see. So if you've ever shot astrophotography, the Milky Way, you might notice that it requires a good amount of post-processing to make the Milky Way pop the same way that we're used to seeing in these photos, and it doesn't usually look like that by the naked eye. The same goes for using neutral density filters to shoot very long exposures and capture the movement of dragging out clouds and running water. And this is something that we'll never be able to see with our naked eye, however, has become completely commonplace in the photography world. This begs the question, do we need to be honest to just our cameras, our eyes, or both? Now, I would never do this, but one can make the argument that it is less obtrusive or dishonest to the eyes to add in Photoshop a sun flare that you didn't quite capture with your camera than to use a neutral density filter and slow down the movement of water in a way that your eyes would never have seen. The sun flare exists, you just didn't quite capture it, versus the neutral density filter is manufacturing a sight which you have never been able to see. This is why I'll refine my rule of thumb and say that ethical landscape photography has to be shot at a single moment, but that moment does not have to be at the same frame rate which our eyes see at. Just because our eyes see at a very fast frame rate does not mean our camera has to, and a 60-second long exposure is still a moment of time. So personally, if I could have vision of 60-second long exposures at all time, I think that'd be a beautiful world to live in. Unfortunately, I'll have to settle for shooting that with my camera. After all of this, I think it'd be reductivist of me to set any sort of hard rules as far as when you need to disclose of your photo editing, but I will leave you with one simple request, and that is, for the sake of all beginner and professional photographers out there, if you ever feel that your post-processing extends beyond the realm of reality, to just disclose this in the caption. For all those people that want to post those cheesy shots of the Manhattan skyline with an impossible Milky Way over it, perfectly okay. Just write in the caption that this is a composite image and I'll be able to sleep so much better at night. A photographer's Instagram feed that disregards photo ethics for the sake of maximizing likes and creating HyperRealism work is doing an insane disservice to so many photographers, either inspiring people to take these expensive trips where they're going to feel disappointed when they get there and it doesn't live up to the unrealistic expectations you've created, or worse, they're not going to realize that you've duped them and they're just going to think that they're not as good of a photographer as they ever thought they were, and it's going to be incredibly discouraging to them. And to me, that is the most heartbreaking thing. So please disclose of your compositing in the captions. It's so simple. On a final note, I want to put things into perspective, the gravity and the stakes that we have when it comes to taking advantage of photography ethics. What we have at risk as far as landscape photography ethics being abused is relatively low in comparison to what is happening in the fashion photography and portraiture realm. When you have people using Photoshop on pictures of models to create unrealistic beauty standards for quality of skin and what are reasonable body proportions to exploit people's insecurities and sell more product, that is a much graver impact that is really important to be aware of, and this is why photography ethics are so important. There is so much more to be discussed about ethical photography. Within the realm of landscapes, we could talk about the ethical act of shooting and how to responsibly interact with nature, the ethics of geotagging. A lot of photographers believe you shouldn't geotag your landscape photos in hopes of preservation and not making them blown out Instagram spots. And finally, there's the ethics of why you haven't followed me on Instagram yet. That is the most unethical thing you've done all day. So definitely check out my Instagram. But seriously, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you've learned something valuable from this video and made you think. I would love to hear your thoughts on everything I've had to say because I know I've put out many strong opinions in this. So please leave a comment down below. I will be responding to many of them and hopefully we can get a good dialogue going amongst everyone watching these videos. That's what YouTube is about. Anyway, thank you so much again for watching and I will see you eventually.